Alright, welcome back. So in this lecture we're going to add our add item widget. So basically every time we add an item to our inventory, when we swing our hatchet or pickaxe on a rock or a tree and we add an item, we're going to have a little widget that pops up and says that we added 3 wood to our inventory. So let's go ahead and get started. So in our widgets, what we want to do is in our inventory widgets, we want to create a new widget. So right click under the user interface, create a widget blueprint of the type user widget, and we'll name this to w_item added. So then double click and open this up, and inside of here we need to add a size box. And so we'll go ahead and select the size box here. And we actually need to right click and rename this to resource window. And up in the top in the details, you want to check this and make sure that it is checked to is a variable. Compile, save that. And in the details here under the width and height override, we're going to check both of these and set the width override to 300 pixels. Set the height override to 45 pixels. And then under the fill screen, set this to desired on screen. So we have this little tiny rectangular notification icon. Okay. Then on our size box, we'll add a horizontal box, and in there we'll add a border, and we're going to set the brush color here. So select the brush color down here. And we're going to set this to a black color. Under the alpha, we're going to set this to 0.5. So this will give us sort of a transparent background. Then in our border, we're going to add a horizontal box. And in that horizontal box, we'll add a size box. And then in that size box, we'll add a image. Okay, and so select the size box, and we want to set the width override to 40, and compile, save that, and select the image here and rename this to resource icon, and select the icon here and set the padding to 5, so it looks like this. And then the next thing that we need to add is a text, so search for text and drag this and add this into the horizontal box, so it's right next to the size box. So make sure it's inside this horizontal box. Select this text. We're going to set the font size to 20 and set the vertical alignment to center align vertically, and we're going to name this text to added and then colon. And for the color and opacity, we'll change this to like a bluish color. Then we'll add another text on that horizontal box, so it's to the right of this added. And for this, we'll set the font size to 16. Set it to vertically align, center align vertically. And for the text here, we can add X44 stone. Okay, so depending on which item we'll add, we'll change this text. And so, in fact, we'll need to go ahead and rename this text block here to resource text and set this to is variable. Compile, save. And then we want to set this text to also fill. Okay. So basically, when I change the name here to say added hatchet item, whatever, you're going to see that this expands, the black border in the back expands no matter how long the name is. Okay, and so we have all the widgets here set up. So now we just need to set up the logic for it. So in our graph here, we're going to delete all these little events, and then we're going to add a new variable here. We'll name this to resource image. Change this to a texture 2D. Object reference, compile, save, And we want to set this to instance editable expose on spawn. Add another variable, name this to resource quantity, and change this to an integer. Make sure that's set to instance editable expose on spawn. Add one last variable, name this to a resource name, change that to a text, set that to instance editable and expose on spawn. And rather than setting up these variables on like the event construct, since we're going to be adding this to our main widget and then destroying it, so it's only going to be up for whenever we add an item, we're going to just bind the variables to these different widgets. Okay, usually I don't use binding as much because it's kind of like an event tick. So basically we can select the resource icon here, and in this brush you see we have this bind, and so you can select the resource image. So basically this brush is bound to this resource image variable right here. Okay, this resource image texture 2D. Now again, the reason why I don't like using these bindings is because this is basically a tick event, so it will continue ticking until you update this, and even then it will still keep ticking. So I use this quite sparingly, but since this widget will only be on the screen for a couple seconds at a time, and we will be setting these variables when we create the widget, it's not going to be too much of an issue using these bindings. So next thing, so we bound the resource image, we want to select our text, and in the text here, instead of binding it to this name or quantity, we need to do this create binding. Okay, so there's a difference between binding it to a single variable and creating a binding. So if we click create binding, what this does is this creates this function. So the return value of this function is what this text will be set to. Okay, so basically we want to have the quantity in front and then the item name to the right of it. Okay, so to do that, we just get our resource name variable here and our resource quantity, and then off of this return value we'll just do a format text. And so in our format text we use the squiggly brackets to create a format. And so in front of the squiggly brackets we'll put an X, and then inside of the squiggly brackets we'll name this quantity, and then we'll do a space, another squiggly brackets, and inside that we'll do name. And so when we add that, you'll see that the quantity and the name, which are in squiggly brackets, will be added down here. So then we can hook up the resource name for the name. And for this resource quantity, we want to convert this to a text. So do to text integer, and hook it up for the quantity like so. So now in our designer here, this resource text is bound to this get resource text function, which basically takes these two variables and formats the text. Okay, so now we should be able to implement this and add this to whenever we add an item by chopping our tree, to have this show up on our screen. So the way that we're going to do that is in our widgets main widget, we're going to, over here on the left, we're going to add a vertical box and just drag this onto our canvas panel. And then we can size this to something like this. And so this will be sort of like our notification box. So every time we add an item, we'll create this little widget and add it to this box. Okay, so we want to anchor this box to the center left, like so. And we'll kind of move this to at least center it up like so. I'll save. We'll rename the vertical box to resource collected and set this to is variable. So now in the graph, we want to create add custom event and name this to show item collected. And then we'll add 3 inputs for this event. So we'll go ahead and add the first input, which will be resource image. Go ahead and set this to a texture 2D. Object reference. Add another variable here and name this to resource quantity. And change this to a integer. And finally add the last variable here, which will be named resource name, and change this to a text. Okay, so when we call this event, we want to go ahead and do a create widget. And so the widget that we want to create is our W item added. So now you'll see we have these variables exposed. So we can hook up our resource image to the resource image, the quantity, and the name. And then we want to get our resource collected vertical box. So make sure that you set this to a variable, otherwise you can't get it on here on the graph. So grab that, get it, and you want to do add child. Okay. And for the child, we want to add this widget that we create, like so. Okay. So now all we need to do is call this event inside of our player controller and inside of our character when we do our harvest item event. Okay. So in our Blueprints player controller, go ahead and right click inside of here and add custom event. We'll name this show item widget. Set this to run on owning client, because to access this widget we have to do this on the client. We'll add the same 3 inputs. So we'll have a resource image, set that to a texture 2D, object reference. Then we'll have a resource quantity, set that to an integer. Then we have resource name, set that to a text. And then we can get our main widget reference and call that show item collected. And just hook up the execution pins and all of the variables like so. Okay, compile, save that. And so if we go into our first person character blueprint, we have this harvest item on server event that we created in our last lecture. And inside of this harvest item function, if we double click and open this up, all we want to do is get controller, and we want to call that show item widget event. So drag off here and do survival game PC ref. So this is our interface message, which allows us to call any event or function that's inside of our controller. So off of here we'll do our show item widget. And then for these item icons, quantity and resource name, all we need to do is copy this local quantity, paste it over here and hook that up. For our resource image and name, we have this local out row. So you can either drag off of here and do a break, s item info, or you can just get this local variable, local out row, and do a break s item info. And then click the drop down, we have this item icon. We'll hook that for the resource image. For the name, we'll hook up the item name, and then you can minimize that like so. Okay. So now when this harvest item function gets called, we'll do this show item widget inside of our player controller, which will get our main widget reference, and we'll call this event inside of our main widget reference, which basically creates this add item widget and adds it to this little notification box. Okay. So let's go ahead and just test everything to see if it works. So if we add our item, if I go ahead and chop this tree, you'll see that we have added 3 wood, added 3 wood, added 3 wood, and we finished off the tree, so it doesn't have any more health. But now you can see that we still have that added, those notifications are still on our screen. So we need to have it fade away and disappear, okay? So let's go ahead and implement that. In our W added item, we want to add what's called an animation for our widget. That way we can have this fade out and then just have the widget destroy itself, okay? If you don't know, you can have like widget animations, and down here in the animations, you can see we can add a new animation, and we have sort of like this track, okay? So first let's go ahead and add a new animation, and we'll just name this to fade out. And with that animation selected, you select it. So make sure you select this fade out. So deselect it and then select it so that this track button is not grayed out, okay? So now with this fade out animation selected, we can add a track. And it's going to list all of the widgets that we can add a track for. So we want to add a track for this resource window, which is our size box. And if you don't see this in here, you want to make sure that this resource window is set to is variable, okay? So make sure that's set to is variable, otherwise when we add a track here for our resource window, you're not going to see it under here. So select the resource window, and with this selected, we want to add a track. And you see here we have different properties that we can modify. And what we want to modify is the render opacity. So this determines whether or not it should be visible or hidden. So if I click render opacity, we add a new track. And so basically I can click on this little circle icon right here, and that will add a key. And if you take this little track right here, you can expand it to however long or however many seconds you want, okay? Because it starts at 0 seconds, and you can go however many seconds long the animation needs to be. For our case, we want to set this to 3 seconds. So take this red section right here and move this to 3. And so we keyframed, we click this little button to keyframe our render opacity at 1, right here at 0, 0. Then you want to take this over to 2, and then click on this little icon, little circle icon, to add another key. So we're giving it about 2 seconds of full opacity, and then finally take it to 3 seconds and set the render opacity to 0. And so now what you'll see is if we drag this all the way back, and if I hit spacebar, you can see we can see it, the notification, and then it fades away. Okay? So that's our simple animation. And there's different, more different tracks that you can add, and there's so many more things that you can do with widgets to, animate text and stuff like that. But for now, this will do. So in our graph, what we want to do is we want to play this animation. So go to your event graph and right click, we want to add a event construct. So when this animation is created, basically in the main widget we do this create widget. So when it's created, we want to get our animations. So we should have under the animations this fade out. So if we drag this on our graph and get it, we can do a play animation, which will then play this widget animation, okay? So we're not actually done yet. We're playing this animation once, and once it's done, what we want to do is we want to destroy this widget, okay? So off of this fade out, you want to drag off of here and do a bind to animation finished. So basically when this animation is finished playing, we have this little red delegate node which we can bind to an event. So if I type in add custom event, you can see that this little red node is bound to this little event. So when this animation is finished playing, it will call this event, okay? So we'll go ahead and rename this to destroy self. Then the actual node to destroy this widget is just to remove from parent. So now what we should see is when we add this little notification widget to our main widget inside of this little box, we should see it for about 2 seconds, and then it will fade away and destroy itself. So let's go ahead and hit play here. So I'll add the item, hatchet item, and then I can go ahead and chop this. You see, we see it for 2 seconds, then it fades away. Then you can see those widgets fade away like so, okay? So basically every time we chop a tree and we get resources, it will create that little widget and show us a little notification of every item that we collect, okay? And it does this nice little fade out before the widget is destroyed. Alright, so that is it for this lecture. We created a nice little notification widget for when we harvest resources or when we gather resources. In our next lecture, what I want to finish is creating the palm tree destructible. So when we finish harvesting the tree, we want the tree to basically fall down to the ground and then despawn. So with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next lecture.